story of George I is one of contradiction. A German prince who became a British king, a victorious general who relied entirely on politicians, and a man whose lifelong personal dramas inadvertently forged the modern British government. Born George Ludwig, the Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, he was never meant to rule the powerful island across the North Sea. His life was deeply rooted in the intricate world of German statesmanship and military command, a world he governed effectively as Elector of Hanover from 1698. Born in Osnabrück, Hanover in May 1660, his future was secured not by his father, Ernest Augustus, but by his mother, Sophia of the Palatinate. Sophia, a granddaughter of King James I of England, was the vital thread connecting the German House of Hanover to the British crown. Although George's attention remained primarily focused on continental affairs, fighting with distinction against the French during the War of the Spanish Succession, it was this English ancestry that would ultimately redefine his destiny. Suppose the distant promise of a crown defined George's dynastic life. A spectacular disaster determined his personal life. In 1682, George married his first cousin, Sophia Dorothea of Celle. It was purely an arranged match engineered by their mothers for essential financial and dynastic leverage. George's mother, Duchess Sophia, secured a very substantial dowry payable in annual instalments, confirming that the transaction was about gold and not affection. The marriage began in hostility and soon became toxic. Sophia Dorothea, described as vivacious and good-looking, took an instant dislike to her new husband, allegedly referring to him as a pig snout. George, for his part, was reportedly horrified by the match, partly because his bride was the daughter of his father's mistress and had been born out of wedlock, though her parents did eventually marry. The couple, however, produced two children, George II, the future King of England, and Sophia Dorothea, who would later become Queen of Prussia and the mother of Frederick the Great. The mutual loathing between the spouses led them to seek comfort elsewhere. While George began a relationship with a series of paramours, the first and most enduring of whom was Erengard Melusine von der Schulenburg, Sophia Dorothea found companionship in the dashing Swedish officer, Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck. The relationship between Sophia Dorothea and Königsmarck was intense and detailed, as evidenced by extensive correspondence. Historical accounts calculate that the pair exchanged hundreds of letters, approximately 340 written by Königsmarck and 320 by Sophia Dorothea. These letters, meticulously numbered, prove the depth of their relationship. In 1694, the affair reached its explosive end. Königsmarck disappeared under mysterious and violent circumstances. The fate of the Count was never officially resolved, though rumours of foul play by George's order persisted for centuries. The discovery of a body gave the mystery new life during renovations. Remains were found under the foundations of Leine Palace in Hanover, a discovery that suggested the possibility that Hanoverian authorities had murdered Königsmarck. George's reaction was swift and unforgiving. He divorced Sophia Dorothea in 1694 on the grounds of infidelity and ordered her perpetual imprisonment. She was sent to the remote castle of Ahlden, where she spent the remaining 32 years of her life in confinement. The severity of George's response, not just divorce but total lifelong isolation, demonstrated that the affair was not merely a private scandal, but was treated by the Hanoverian court as a high-stakes threat to their entire dynastic future. At this time, George's mother, Sophia, was now recognised Protestant heir to the British throne. Any suggestion of illegitimacy concerning George's children or any instability caused by a runaway queen could be exploited by exiled Catholic claimants, the Jacobites, to undermine the legitimacy of George's line. The court systematically confiscated and destroyed the extensive correspondence between the lovers and censored court records, illustrating that the containment of Sophia Dorothea was essentially a preemptive act of political warfare intended to protect the impending British succession. Her permanent confinement ensured the required legitimacy and stability for the House of Brunswick-Lüneburg to pursue the crown of Great Britain confidently. This foundational period of his life sets the stage for the dramatic personal tensions and political necessities that would follow George to England. Following her divorce, Sophia Dorothea was completely isolated and never released from the castle of Ahlden, where she eventually died in 1726. For George I, his former wife was a dynastic inconvenience who had to be permanently removed from sight, and despite her lifelong confinement, she never admitted to the adulterous relationship, yet her isolation was extreme. On one occasion, she managed a brief escape to Wolfenbüttel in 1697. More poignantly, the walls and doors of her confinement tower were found covered in unique texts, sacred poems, and memoir-like prose, which served as powerful written accusations against her enemies at the Hanoverian court. With his wife banished, George solidified his relationship with Erengard Melusine von der Schulenburg, a woman who had served as a maid of honour in his mother's household and whose connection with George began around 1690. Their bond was founded on mutual attraction and shared interests such as music and the theatre, and it endured for nearly 3 decades, and Melusine even gave birth to 3 daughters by George. When George became king, Melusine accompanied him to England and was granted the title Duchess of Kendal. She wielded extraordinary political power. Robert Walpole, one of the most powerful politicians of the era, openly confided that she did everything and was, in effect, as much Queen of England as ever any was. The Duchess of Kendal used this access to sell titles, public offices, and patent rights, successfully building a substantial fortune. Melusine's power was challenged only by another key figure in George's intimate circle, Sophia Charlotte von Kielmansegg. Sophia Charlotte, who was made Countess of Darlington, was the daughter of George's father's mistress and was believed to be George's half-sister. Though her blood relationship to the king was not widely known, the public generally assumed that she too was his mistress, fueling rumours of a scandalously incestuous relationship. When George and his entourage arrived in England, their German origins and appearances immediately became subjects of merciless British satire. Melusine, who was tall and slender, was cruelly nicknamed the Maypole. Sophia Charlotte, who was known for being portly, was dubbed the Elephant. George I's reliance on his long-standing German inner circle and these 2 powerful women immediately established a precedent where political power in Britain could be wielded by unelected foreign individuals who profited from their access to the monarch. This blatant patronage and foreign influence were evident to the British public, intensifying the already present need for a powerful indigenous political class that could manage the king and the nation simultaneously. This dynamic directly propelled the elevation of George's British Whig ministers, who served as a necessary counterbalance to the perceived corruption of the German court. While George was securing his German domains and navigating his complex personal life, fate was being decided for him across the Channel. The British Parliament was desperate to secure a Protestant succession following the deaths of Queen Mary II, the last surviving child of Queen Anne. This led to the passage of the Act of Settlement in 1701. The Act was revolutionary. It reinforced the constitutional monarchy established by the Bill of Rights in 1689 and mandated that no Roman Catholic could ever inherit the throne. This ruling successfully ruled out over 50 Catholic claimants. The crown was settled upon George's mother, Princess Sophia, Electress of Hanover, and her Protestant heirs. The Act of Settlement was designed to limit royal power and secure the rights and liberties of the subject. George's mother died in June 1714, just weeks before Queen Anne. Consequently, the succession passed directly to her son, George, the Elector of Hanover. It meant George ascended to the British throne based not on military conquest or divine right, but on a clear written mandate from the British Parliament. August 1st, 1714, Queen Anne died, and George Louis was ushered into power by the Whigs, who had just secured control of the government. Though the arrival of a German prince might have seemed shocking, the transition was relatively smooth. The consensus, heavily influenced by the Protestant mandate of the Glorious Revolution, was simple: better a German than a papist. George's command of the English language was minimal or non-existent, which created an immediate barrier to communication. This linguistic handicap forced George to rely profoundly on his British ministers and initially on his son, the Prince of Wales, for translation. This inherent limitation in George's ability to govern intimately cemented the existing shift in power dynamics toward the Parliament and its effective leadership. George's first year was marked by immediate existential threats. The exiled Catholic claimant James Stuart, the Old Pretender, mainly supported by disgruntled Tories, launched the Jacobite Rising of 1715, attempting to seize the throne. The defeat of this rebellion secured the Hanoverian position and presented a spectacular opportunity for the ruling Whig Party. George's ministers, most notably the rising figure of Sir Robert Walpole, skillfully weaponised the failure of the Rising. They deliberately made the Tory opposition virtually synonymous with Jacobitism and treason, thereby neutralising them as a viable political force in Britain for decades. This political manoeuvre ensured the long-term dominance of the Whig Party under the Hanoverian umbrella. George I, lacking little political knowledge, cultural fluency, and command of the language, desperately needed a capable political manager to navigate the complexities of Parliament and public opinion. The astute and influential Whig politician Robert Walpole proved to be that necessary man. The king's personal flaws, the language barrier, and the subsequent alienation of his son were not just sources of drama, they were the structural forces that accelerated the rise of the Prime Minister and solidified constitutional governance. George's inability to govern intimately forced him into delegation. The stability of the state depended less on the character of the sovereign and more on the effectiveness of the cabinet. George I's circumstances inadvertently fostered the very system of parliamentary governance that he would normally reign over. Walpole thus became the irreplaceable man who could dig him out of a monarchical disaster, proving his political astuteness again and again. The relationship between George I and his son and heir, the Prince of Wales, future George II, quickly deteriorated upon their arrival in Britain. This open hostility would become a defining feature and recurring crisis for the House of Hanover. Tension erupted spectacularly in 1717 during the christening of the Prince of Wales' second son, Prince George William. A bitter dispute arose over the naming of the child and the king's choice of godparents, leading to the Prince of Wales to challenge one of the king's courtiers to a duel. George I retaliated severely. He banished his son and daughter-in-law from court, but significantly, he retained custody of their children. When the baby, Prince George William, died just 3 months later, Prince of Wales publicly blamed his father for the tragedy, fracturing their relationship beyond repair. With both the monarch George I and the heir George II compromised, one by language and foreign commitments, and the other by public hostility and banishment, the resulting vacuum of effective executive leadership was filled by a reliable, articulate English-speaking operator, Robert Walpole. This period marks the practical moment of constitutional transition. The family's drama guaranteed that political power would flow not from personal wishes of the monarch, but from the competent management provided by the leader of the Commons. A devastating financial crisis soon tested the political ability achieved through the defeat of the Jacobites. The South Sea Bubble of 1720 was the 18th century's equivalent of a catastrophic financial crash, widely recognised as one of the world's first Ponzi schemes and an example of mass speculation mania. George I was personally implicated in this disaster. In 1718, he had taken the governorship of the South Sea Company. This royal endorsement served to widely inflate the stock price, as nothing instills confidence quite like the endorsement of a ruling monarch. The company, however, was not making the profits it promised. Instead, it was merely trading in increasing amounts of its own stock. When the bubble burst, it led to a massive economic dislocation and public fury. The outcry at the financial crash led to parliamentary inquiries and the trial of the company directors for bribery. George I's personal association with the bubble directly linked the crown to the catastrophic public disaster, making the king politically vulnerable and necessitating an external fixer. This moment was the making of Robert Walpole. He seized the opportunity to demonstrate his credentials, using great oratory skills and political flair to manage the crisis and rectify some of the financial damage. Walpole leveraged the resulting political fallout, condemning the stock jobbing and the nouveau riche as an opportunity for political spin and show trials. This masterful handling of a monarchical disaster established him as the preeminent statesman of his generation. Walpole's success was predicted on his ability to be seen as cleaning up a mess that originated near the royal court itself. Intriguingly, while the general public suffered, George's powerful mistress Melusine had amassed a substantial fortune by buying and selling South Sea stock, highlighting the entanglement of court access and the massive financial gain. George I's personal involvement in the South Sea Company, coupled with the enrichment of his foreign mistress, transformed the financial crisis into a moral and constitutional indictment of the Hanoverian court. This provided Walpole with the perfect justification to seize political dominance. The crisis reinforced the public appetite for accountability and the check on royal power, fundamentally shifting political power away from the sovereign's personal court and toward the competent national governance of the Whig cabinet. By consistently relying on Walpole, George I inadvertently enabled the institutionalisation of the Prime Minister's role, shifting the balance of power permanently towards the House of Commons. The Whigs solidified their grip on power further in 1722 with the discovery of the Atterbury Plot, another pro-Stuart conspiracy. This allowed George I's ministers to equate the Tory opposition with Jacobitism and treason successfully. By the end of his reign, George I had confirmed that his dynasty would rely solely on the Whig Party to manage the nation, ensuring political stability through singular party dominance. In his later years, George I continued to focus heavily on continental diplomacy and his interests in Hanover. He remained committed to the German domain he had ruled since 1698. The personal dramas of his life concluded before his death. His imprisoned wife, Sophia Dorothea, died in the castle of Ahlden in 1726, having spent 32 years separated from her children and prevented from ever becoming Queen of England. The relationship between George I and George II never recovered from the bitterness of the 1717 christening incident. Memoirs from the time confirmed the intense animosity and noted apparent general differences, particularly regarding attitudes towards money and royal power. George I's enduring commitment to his homeland was confirmed in his death. He died in 1727, not in London, but while travelling in Germany, specifically in Osnabrück, the town of his birth. George I's prioritisation of German affairs solidified the shift of the monarch's political centre of gravity away from London, thereby strengthening the institutional autonomy of the British Parliament. Because George I viewed Britain primarily as a crucial, though secondary asset that served Hanoverian diplomatic goals, he willingly allowed British ministers such as Walpole to manage the messy day-to-day politics of the island. Despite the personal drama, the Jacobite uprisings and the financial turmoil of the bubble, the transition of power upon his death to George II was smooth and peaceful. It confirmed the stability of the new political framework George I had fostered by necessity. Robert Walpole, the indispensable minister, successfully managed the transition and remained chief minister under the new king. George I left a legacy not of personal popularity or brilliance, but of profound constitutional change. His circumstances, including the language barrier, toxic family dynamics, reliance on German confidants like Melusine, and the necessity of navigating major crises, created the exact conditions required for the rise of a powerful, autonomous British political class led by the Prime Minister. George I was an unintentional architect of the prime ministerial system, establishing his family's rule in Britain and laying the groundwork for the evolution of parliamentary governance. His reign demonstrated that the British Crown could survive and transfer power smoothly, even with a sovereign who was structurally absent from the nation's active governance.